Okay, so first of all, I wanted to apologize for not being here yesterday. So I'm going to go over yesterday's warm up and today's warm up. So on Tuesday, which was yesterday, you had to convert a decimal to a fraction. Now remember, the 3 steps is to read it, write it, and simplify it. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and just go and work on reading it. So when you have 0.25, the 5 is in the hundreds place, so you would solve it as 25 over, or write it as a 25 over 100. Then you have to simplify. Now I know I could divide by 25 because 25, if you think about it, it's a quarter, and a quarter, how many quarters does a dollar have? So when I divide by that, it's going to give me 1 over 4. Now, this is one of the most common conversions, so make sure that you are memorizing or learning what they are as we keep working with fractions and decimal conversions. The next one, you have 1 and 2 tenths. So I'm going to write it as 1. The word "and" indicates that there's a whole number and a fraction, so I'm going to write 2 over 10. Then, to simplify it, I'm going to go ahead and divide by 2, and this is going to be 1 over 5. So when we do that, we write it as 1 and 1/5. And again, 2/10 is a very common fraction that is a conversion, so make sure you understand it. The last one is going to be 0.78, which we would read it as 78 hundredths. Now this one, we could divide it by 2. So if I write it divided by 2, that's going to be 39 over 50. So can I simplify that more? Probably not. So then my answer is 39/50. Okay, so let's go over Wednesday's warm-up. So on Wednesday's warm-up, we had to convert a fraction to a decimal. And in order to do that, we have to divide the numerator by the denominator. That's going to be top in, bottom out. So that means that the top number is going to be inside the division box and the bottom number is going to be outside. Now, I know that 5 cannot go into 4. But what we do need to add decimal and bring it up and add 3 zeros. Now the 3 zeros, sometimes you'll use them, sometimes you won't use them all, but for the most part, that's what we usually write. So now all we do is go ahead and divide. So I know for 40, now we're looking at 40, divided by 5 is 8. So I'm going to go ahead and say 5 times 8 is 40. And in this case, it's 0. Because this is 0, then that means I did not need those zeros. So then my answer is going to be 8/10. The next one, you have 3/8. And again, it's a fraction turned into a decimal. So the strategy is to divide the numerator by the denominator. Top in, bottom out. And again, I know that 8 does not go into 3 any time. So 8 times 0 is 0. So now what we're going to do, we're going to add the decimals and the 3 zeros. Now what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and divide it. So 8 into 30 is going to go 6 times, which is 24. Subtract the remainder, 6. 8 into 60 is going to be 7 times. So 7 times 8 is 56. Remainder is 4. And 8 into 40 is 5 times. 8 times 5 is 40. Remainder is 0. So that means 3/8 is equivalent to, actually, this is going to be equivalent to 375. Sorry, made a mistake here. So that should be 375,000. So now make sure that you use this strategy for all of them. There's other strategies that I showed you during class, but this is the one that will always work no matter what the fraction is. So here's the answer key for Monday's homework. I know you were supposed to take it home. Make sure you're grading it and turning it in. If you have not completed it, make sure you're showing work, because if you give me answers only, I will not consider it and not give you credit for it. So today we're going to be talking about square models. And the reason we're doing square models is because we've been doing fraction conversions, fractions and decimal conversions. So I'm going to show you why we know that for every fraction there is a decimal, and for every decimal there is a fraction. So let's look at the first part. Now the first part you have, it says, if possible, shade in 1/4 of the box below. Now the way we're talking about it is that we're going to shade 1/4. So I'm going to go ahead and start with 4 little squares and shade in, and actually divide everything with 4 little squares, because that means I'm going to shade in 1 for every 4 squares. And because I know 4 is my total and there is 4 in each part here, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I already divided this into 4 squares. Now all I'm going to do is shade in 1. So I'm shading in 1, shading in 1 for each one. So let's keep doing that. So if you notice, I have 1 out of 4, 1 out of 4, 1 out of 4, 1 out of 4, and so on. Okay, so now how many did I know the denominator is going to be 100, but before we get there, the numerator, how many did I shade in? So if you count them all, you have 5 in each row, so that's going to be 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. So that means my numerator now is going to be 25. So as a fraction, you would write as 25 over 100. And as a decimal, you're going to write it as 2500. Now the bottom says group the fractional part to represents 1/4. If possible, prove that 1/4 has been shaded. So all I have to do is I'm going to go ahead and divide this into 4 parts. And then I'm going to shade in 1 section. So if you really want to know if you did that, then I'm going to go ahead and count. So that's 5, then that's another 10, 15, 20, and 25. So that means that this total was 25, so that means I did it correctly. Now let's look at the next part. The next part says if possible, shade in 3/5 of the box below. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to do the same thing, but instead of doing 4 in each, I'm going to do 5 in each. But I'm going to do it this way because if you notice, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's 5. That is my denominator. The numerator is 3. So that means I need to shade in 3 parts. So I'm going to shade in 3 parts. So 3 parts out of 5. And over here, the same thing. 3 parts out of 5. So I know going down, it's each row is going to be 10. So I know this is going to be 10. So that's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. So my numerator is 60. My denominator is 100. So my fraction is 60 out of 100, which is now, as a decimal, is 0.60. But I could also simplify it to 0.6. Because the 0, if you take it away, it still has the same value. So now what I'm going to do is it says group the fractional part to represent 3/5. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do the same thing, but now I'm going to divide it differently. I divide it into 5 parts. So that means that's 5 parts. Now I'm going to shade in 3 parts. So in this case, we have 60 out of 100. And it's still going to show 3 out of 5. Now the next one, it's asking for 2/3. Now 2/3 is a little bit difficult, but I'm going to try to show you what I mean by 2/3. So in this case, I'm dividing this, so that's 3, 3, 3. Then because I don't have no more rows, I'm going to divide that into 3 little squares, 3 little squares, 3 little squares, and that final little square, I'm going to divide it into 3 also, and it's already divided here. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to shade in 2 out of the 3. So that's 2, 2, 2. Now I'm going to do 2 here, 2 there, 2 there, and the last part, that's the hardest part, so I'm going to shade in 2 also. So if you think about it, if you count how many they are, we're going to say this is 10, this is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, and 2/3. So the numerator is going to be now 66 and 2/3. The denominator is 100. So the fraction is going to be, I'm going to put it this way, 66 and 2/3 over 100. Now we know numerators cannot have fractions. So that means if it's 2/3, that means that 6 is going to continue on. So my decimal is going to be 66, which is keeps going, but as a decimal, we write it as a repeating decimal with a bar notation on top. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and shade this in. So I know it's going to be 66 and 2/3. So I'm going to try my best to do that. So this is 66 and 2/3. So I'm going to shade it in. Oops. So that's 6 tenths and 6 ones, 6, and then the 2/3. So in this case, I kind of proved that if I put it all together, it shows only partially covered. So make sure that you understand this before you go on to your classwork, which becomes homework if you don't finish it. And that's going to be what's next. Okay, so this is going to be your classwork homework. It's calling Matching Madness. What you're doing, you're basically figuring out the fraction and the decimal equivalency. You're using fraction models, decimal models, and do it similar to what we did earlier. Remember, fraction power of 10 is the one that has tens, hundreds, or thousands as a denominator. For the last one with the fractions only, you have 7/25. It might not show in your copy, so make sure that you are copying that down and shading it in. So good luck on completing this, and we'll be grading it tomorrow.